I spent 5 years making a documentary that pretty much no one will ever see. And sadly, that is not an uncommon story. I want you to learn from my mistakes, so when you make your next documentary, you can make something enjoyable, viewable, and, could you imagine, profitable. Gear is very important for your shoots, and knowing what gear is right for the shoot is more important than just having a cool, new, or expensive camera. Sometimes I would actually rather shoot on this than this. So today, let's talk about the gear that I used for my documentary all of those years ago, and why it was a massive mistake. Episode 3. Props. There's something about this filtered water. I get the RO water. Let's get into it. Episode 3. I have it listed as Gearing Up Archive Prep. So as I mentioned, I teased last episode, something that's very important to every documentary, especially if it's a long haul documentary, is the gear you choose to use and your plan for archiving footage and any other asset that you would use. This is something that I think a lot of people skim over or don't even consider. It's something I was very familiar with even at the time in 2015-16, but it's also something that still took me by surprise, and I'll tell you why. So when I was shooting for public access for the marketing company, production company that I worked for, they were given gear by the city. So we're talking like, what were they? Blackmagic studio cameras, the big ones. Those were for literally the studio shoots. And then they had Blackmagic, the original Blackmagic Pocket, the BMPCC cinema cameras, the little one that like literally could fit in your pocket if there wasn't a lens on it. That was what I had available to me at the time. I think I had a Canon 6D at the time as well, but obviously Pocket cinema camera is incredible because, well, at the time it was because it was raw DNG cinema log, whatever they wanted to call it back then. Blackmagic has always had a really cool raw DNG like color thing going on. And even back then, I mean, it's kind of reminded me of the old Red Epic that I had, the first Red Epic that ever came out, the MX sensor. Red, when they made that, they wanted to still emulate film. That was the goal, was to make it look like film with the grain and the way the dynamic range worked. I guess maybe that a little bit. I think they were pretty much stuck in the dynamic range, but at the time. The same thing for the Blackmagic Pocket cinema camera is Blackmagic wanted it to look like cinema footage. So it's just the look of it. It's hard to explain. There's a million and one videos like this on YouTube that you could go look at to kind of discover this really special camera and the look that comes out of it. People still shoot with this. I don't know why, but they do. But yeah, so I'll go through the gear first, and then we'll talk about why and what happened with all of that. I did decide to use all the gear that was provided to me through public access through that contract because it was free to me. There were only a few times over the course of a year and a half where I would try to rent it out, and it was rented out, so not a big deal. The situation is that there was a Blackmagic Pocket cinema camera. There were a few kind of like, cheap Fujifilm type lenses for the Micro Four Thirds mount. But then the owner of the production company owned the Vedras. I almost forgot the name. I think they're now the Mikeys. It's like the rebranded. But the Vedras were sick. They looked nice. They had beautiful bright orange markings on them for focus and for aperture. Yeah, they were primes. So it was a nice set of primes that could be adapted. Oh, actually, I think they were Micro Four Thirds. Yeah, I think the mount was Micro Four Thirds because, yeah, even back then, like the Mikeys now, they were making them for the smaller sensors. So I did, just because I was like obsessed with the idea of making this look like a movie. I was like, this is going to look like a real movie. So I got the Blackmagic Pocket cinema camera and I paired it with these Vedras. And let's talk about why that was a bad idea. So I will say I had my own audio. I had like, a Zoom H6, and I think it's called, with the 4 XLR input. I had one of those. I had a nice shotgun mic. I had lavs and stuff and stands. I have everything I need except for the camera and lenses, to make it, bring that level of quality up just a bit that I wanted. The issue that was happening with that from day one was I wasn't thinking about what the gear would mean for the specific shoot and for the story. I'm glad that I wanted it to look good. I think everyone wants their stuff to look good. I don't know why you'd ever not want it to look good. Actually, let me take that back immediately. As it was coming out of my mouth, I was realizing that the VHS look is back. That's like trending now, which is cool, but it's like people want their footage to look bad again. So good for you. With this gear, it presented problems from day one because, and this is what I'm explaining, is plan for what the shoot calls for, not what you want. And I wanted something really cool and different, and I wanted to look like nothing else that has been made in Tucson in terms of documentaries, and that's great, especially for underground music documentaries. They're always very like underground music documentary look, It's just like really like shitty footage, let's be honest. And so I wanted it to be this like really special look and something that could last for many, many years. You could put up on a movie screen and it would look good. So that's fair. That's the right choice. The raw DNG out of the Blackmagic is a massive, great, huge data, massive files, just a huge amount of information to work with for post. What I didn't think about, and I keep circling around, was it right for the shoot? And from day one, I realized it wasn't right for the shoot. And here's why. This is an underground music documentary that I was doing and pursuing. That means the majority of the footage, besides the interviews, is going to be in low light music venues. The Blackmagic Pocket is not a low light camera. To say it, the very least that it is a daylight balanced protect your highlights camera. That's what it is for. It is not for shooting in low light whatsoever. But I did it, and I kind of pigeonholed myself into it. But also it's like, let's be honest, going back to episode 1 and 2 a little bit, I wasn't planning on anything. I wasn't pitching this to anyone. I wasn't trying to get funding or to get grants or any kind of resources connected to this. So what I had was what I had. And that is a mistake that I talked about before. I would never do something like this again, where whatever camera I have available is what I use, because it's not that, you hear this all the time, that tool isn't always right for any situation. It's right for the right situation. It is a tool, and I'm sure you could, if you had the resources and money and equipment, you could make it decent. But then again, it's like, I think some of those Vajra lenses were 2.5, maybe 2.8. And the ISO, the grain on the Blackmagic Pocket is rough. And it gets to the point where if you're going up past 800 ISO and you're in low light, you're just getting sensor pattern. You're seeing the pattern of the sensor. It's just, it's ugly. It's bad. And that is one of the comments I would get when I was presenting it to people, is they were like, oh, like low contrast, like rough, low light footage. And I was like, yeah, thank you. I know. So that's just the way it goes. But I didn't do the right thing, which is to consider the right gear for the job. It's very simple. It would take 10 seconds for me today to be like, what's right for this? Okay, probably a Sony a7S II. Even the a7S1 is fine, because those literally see in the dark, and they have way better noise reduction in camera. And, with the newer A7s, you can shoot, with larger file formats. So it's all this kind of stuff. It's an easy answer to the question that I should have been asking myself, but I wasn't. So I had this incredible cinema camera with these sick lenses, but I was consistently struggling to see it at these venues because I couldn't see. I couldn't see what the camera was saying. Of course, it is raw, so you are able to lift in post, but you still need to be able to see what you're doing. I don't come from 35 millimeter background. I just missed that cusp, when I was entering into college. And so I never had that like, oh, that's like about 6 feet away, like ish for focus. Like I never had that. I've always relied on a monitor. That has changed a bit since I've done a lot of focus pulling, but back then I was just like, what I see is what I get. That's just how it goes. And that's how I think most people are, especially now with the convenience of cameras and monitors. So what it ended up being was the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, the Vedra lenses. I would typically have a shotgun mounted somewhere running into the zoom, and it depended on the day, really. I wasn't that organized with it. Sometimes I would run the zoom separate, and every single clip, I'll include a raw clip in this.
Sean, who was there from like 2 o'clock, I got there at 4, and like still made more. So.
Yeah. What else? What else?
I mopped the floors.
Okay, chill.
And I emptied the garbage.
Yeah,
I counted some pennies and some nickels.
Every single clip, I would have to line up the audio. So I would be listening for that snap, or I'd be looking for my fingers in each shot when I was in post, when I was putting these together. That's a terrible idea, especially when you are recording house and techno music where it is just pounding bass. And how could you hear this in a club? So there were a few times where I couldn't hear the snap, and I would just look for the right part of the song to match it up. So the whole thing was hodgepodge. It was gear that I had access to, but it wasn't right whatsoever. Sometimes, and I tested this in the beginning, and it was a mistake as well. I thought running the H6 with its nice, whatever you call it, the 120 degree or 90 degree, whatever it is, attachment that the H6 has, I thought that would be enough just for ambient audio, which it is. But the issue was I was running it into the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera with a 3.5 millimeter jack, thinking that since the preamp is decent in the H6, it'll send a way better feed into the Blackmagic Pocket, because that camera was and is, of course, notorious for having the worst sound ever. And of course, the first day I did it, even running out of that nice audio recorder into the H6, it was just like, you could just hear the hissing because the preamp or whatever it is in the Blackmagic Pocket, the Blackmagic Pocket little buzzard thing isn't good. That was a mistake. I then stopped doing that, and then I had to line up the audio because, again, I didn't even think to invest in or buy or consider something like a tentacle link, where it's just like, now you're lining this up with timecode. Didn't even think about that back then. And again, I was just like, there's no money attached to this. I'm not going to spend hundreds of dollars on a little audio thing. Should I have done it? Yes. So I was wrong. Let's see. This is massive. I'll show some clips of this. I baffle myself that I made this choice. And I thought I was like so creative and just like, I was visionary. I was like, I'm this director, like storyteller. What I decided to do was I told myself from day one, even before I knew it was going to be this longer documentary, even for the little 10-minute thing, I was like, this is going to be black and white. It's going to be black and white, raw video. And so what I did for the first few months of this documentary was to reduce file size, because of course the raw files from the Blackmagic Pocket were just unattainable for most people to back up and keep. What I would do is I would every single day basically make dailies. I would come with the raw footage, I'd bring it into DaVinci, and I would convert it into 709, and then I would just make it black and white. I would do a little bit of work, bring up everything that's super dark, and then export it as ProRes. And so it was still a nice beefy 1080 file, which was 1080 raw. So it wasn't going from 4K to 1080. It was already just 1080. Now I'm just making it into a nice ProRes, MOV file. Man, it's uncomfortable to say. It's very embarrassing. I only preserved the black and white footage. That's it. I didn't keep the raw files, and I didn't keep a color version of those files. I'll repeat that. I didn't keep a color version of any of my footage. So, and again, for many months, I thought I was so cool doing this. And then obviously after I realized what was going on with this documentary, I was like, oh no, I got to shoot color. I'll just convert it to black and white in the edit. Duh. So there's a lot of footage, the latest cut that I made of it, which was 2021. Even in that, there's so much black and white footage because I literally don't have color version of it. That's it. That's the only reason. I would prefer for it to be color because, again, thinking, hindsight, I'm looking at these beautiful scenes in, like, Solar Culture was one of the main venues here in Tucson where they did a lot of these shows. Beautiful lasers and just lights and, like, just so much color. And I just made it black and white. So, I was very obsessed with black and white back then. I highly suggest, and this is kind of going away from gear into archive prep, is having a plan for archive is huge. Most productions, even low budget docs, have a DIT or some kind of data management in place, whether it be a person or if it's just the director and they know how to data manage, that's great. I didn't care at all. All I knew is that I was converting these, I was keeping them, and then I would keep a copy of everything on a separate drive, and I thought I was like being so cool because I was like, it's safe just in case this drive goes down, which is good. It's always good to have 1 or 2 backups. But the issue that I ran into was I wasn't prepared for how much data it would be. Again, because I wasn't prepared for the story, the scope of the story. This ended up being, after everything was converted, about 4.5 terabytes, which is not that large because, again, this is all just ProRes files. But if I were smarter at the time and I was backing up the raw files, or at least a nice beefy ProRes of the color versions of the footage, and I had everything else I needed, this would be larger than that. If I kept the raw files, this would be 20 terabytes. Most likely, maybe more. Yeah, it was a lot. The interviews were hours long. I mean, I'm just thinking, I'm like kind of calculating in my head. There were a few interviews that were 3 hours long, 3.5 hours long. There were some that were just like hour, 2 hours, but every interview was intense. And again, I shot the main interviews in RAW because I wanted it to look really good. I'll just encourage myself. I shot them in RAW and then I converted it. Again, there were some that were only black and white because I was just so like in my head about this vision that I had. Recording interviews in RAW, that was pretty stupid. At the time, of course I've been on documentaries where, they want the largest file they can get for archive. And that's when you have a budget or like, it's going to Netflix or something. But for something like what I was doing, I was just thinking too large, and I thought the box was bigger than it was, and I was weirdly thinking too small for that box. I should have been thinking about, okay, this is this great big project, but the issue is that the backup plan needs to be aligned with the scope of the project. So I should have been shooting the interviews in ProRes or 422 or whatever the Blackmagic Pocket cinema camera could do at the time. I think it was 422. Again, just another mistake. So this is pivotal because it quite literally changed the entire feel of my documentary years down the line because I didn't have color footage. And because a lot of the low light, and there were some venues that like had really good light because, like I said, all the lasers, and some had a ton of lights. That was great. But for everything else, it was very dark. And it's just not acceptable footage for a professional documentary. It's good enough, though, for the story. We got that. Let's change the battery. Another note that I have here is the use of zoom lenses. This is something that is such a part of my life now as a documentary filmmaker. I have the Canon Cinema Servo zooms. They're lightweight, 18 to 80, 70 to 200. They are for, F or T, I guess, 4.4. But that's okay because, these cameras now have such high sensitivity sensors for low light. Don't get me wrong, there are some scenarios where I truly just can't use the zooms because it is so low light that I need the 1.8 or 2.8 lenses, which I have the Sigma for those, the Sigma art lenses, which are still lenses, but more than fine. Still, even the stuff that I do. That's the only other caveat that I put in my notes, is that I should have been thinking more about how I like to shoot and what was good for the story, which was zooms. Because the way the parties worked, I would always be like, 20 yards away, 30 yards away sometimes from a stage, or and it's just so crowded, it's hard to maneuver, or if something's happening, you might not have time to make it over there. Things just, I'm very good and comfortable capturing candid things, especially at parties. I can kind of feel what the room is doing, what's going to happen next. But even then, I can't get over to some places in time. I cannot believe I have not knocked this over yet. The zooms were something that would be a non-negotiable to me now that I'm shooting, a next documentary. 100% would be zooms. It's kind of crazy to me that I've seen people shoot documentaries on the prime lenses because they just want that really special look for it. Every single time they lose because of that. And they know they're losing out on shots, and that's okay, and that's good for them. They're comfortable with it. But it's just there is a bit of that ego with DPs I've seen where it's no, we're going to use these primes. And I'm like, yeah, but you're missing all these shots. And they're like, well, that's just the way it goes. Highly suggest figuring out what gear is best for you. And of course, to recap this whole thing, know what is best for the project, not what you want. One of the things I have listed, which I don't really know how this fits into this a bit, but I think it does. In terms of being able to manage the size of your project in terms of data and archiving, backup, stuff like that, it reminds me of that quote that everyone loves.
I've never been in all my life in 70 films, not at 1 hour overtime. And I finish my shooting days at 3:30, 4, because I don't shoot coverage. I know what I'm doing. And it's appalling for me to hear that young filmmakers are shooting 550 hours of footage. My heart sinks. I don't know what they are doing. And it's all mediocre. And you cannot find any gems in an ocean of mediocrity. Be selective. Do what you really need for the screen. Into the abyss, I didn't shoot more than 6 or 8 hours footage for an almost 2-hour film.
There are many filmmakers, myself included, now, that I'm 10 years later, even more so. I think I'm 15 years in the game, basically. You get to the point where you're like, I don't need to get everything. It's a cute idea, and I think it's it's fun to think you can just run around and capture whatever, but you also have to know that no, you're there to get a specific story. You should know what you want. You should try to be feeling things out, get what you need, and then get out. And that's the idea is it ties into this in terms of so many docs now are planned. There's so little let's just run around and discover things. Most of the docs I've seen in the past few years, I would even just say 10 years, is it's just they know exactly what they're trying to get. They're only shooting for, a few hours of footage a day. They're kind of almost letting things unfold in a way that they planned, or they're kind of setting things up and doing scenario stuff. It's no longer just running around with your camera for years and just now you have 6,000 hours of footage to go through. It's there's not much of that anymore. It truly is so planned now. And that's smart because that helps you with your data. Even then, and again, that's kind of why people are shooting on nicer cameras now. You see a lot of ARRI, you see a lot of Sony, and you just see terabytes and terabytes of footage at the end of each day. But they know it's well, they're only doing 10 shoot days. That's fine. So it's that kind of organization that you should be thinking about. What camera you're going to use, how much data that's going to be, how are you going to pay for that backup? You need at least one backup. How are you going to pay for these drives? Who's going to be responsible to make sure that nothing gets lost? Okay, that's it for episode 3. Episode 4, it will be a fun one. I want to just go through a bunch of the footage kind of candidly and just talk a little bit about it, kind of take a break from just talking at you. I want to go through the footage and this is 10 years later, kind of just recall what was happening at the time, any fun things that were going on that I might remember that I'll just be inspired by the footage. So we'll do that. So I hope this was good for you guys in terms of preparing for the shoot, in terms of gear and archive. And next episode we'll start looking at some footage, and I've been talking a lot about it, so now you're about to see what what I was saying. I'll see you then.